Today I think we'll go back to the book of art, talk some more about. Gee, that coffee smells good, Bob. Bob's over there fixing some coffee. Fix me a cup, will you? Yeah, no, I don't want any tea today. Give me some, fix me some of that, pour me some of that coffee. Thanks. Coffee today. Now, I know I'm going to get an email asking me what kind of coffee it is. It's Peet's coffee. I've drank Peet's coffee since 1968. And there's a reason for that. This is not a commercial for Peet. There's a reason I drink Peet's coffee. Peet set up his shop there in first store in Berkeley. And I used to paint out in the Brentwood area out in the country in 1968, and I used to stop by there on the way back to home, and I'd have a cup of coffee. And one day I used to, of course, I had my Van Gogh, Letters of Van Gogh book with me, and one day I was reading, and Mr. Peet, who was always in the shop, he made the coffee. And matter of fact, he used to taste every batch he'd make. That's how particular he was about coffee. He'd make a batch, brew up a batch, he'd be there tasting it, and then he'd go off and do his business. He used to grind the beans right there, and roast the beans right there in his shop. It was on Walnut and Vine there in Berkeley. At any rate, I'd be sitting there having my coffee, and one day he come over, because I was there quite a bit, and he wanted to see what I was reading. And when he saw it was Van Gogh, because he was Dutch, and he just thought that was great, and gave me a free cup of coffee and said, good book, and that's all. Never said anything more, and you know, I kept going there, and then after a while, maybe 2 or 3 years later, maybe even more, 4 years later, I had actually done, during my Van Gogh period, I did a painting of his building, his coffee shop there on Vine. Did some watercolors of it. Anyway, a friend of mine knew I had done that, happened to tell Mr. Peet. I always called him Mr. Peet. His name was Alfred Peet, but I called him Mr. Peet. At any rate, Mr. Peet, one day there's a knock on my door, and here's Mr. Peet. And I open the door, and he looks at me, and he says, "You!" And I said, "Yeah, you!" And he was really surprised. He had seen me before. He didn't know I was the painter this friend of his had talked about. His friend had told him that I'd done these paintings, and he came over to see him. And he didn't know it was me. So anyway, he came in, and I showed him some of my Van Gogh paintings and the paintings I did at his place. But I was more interested in him than he was in me. I couldn't get over it. I told him that I had been to Europe, and I said, but I didn't know anything about coffee. And when I was over in Europe, I went to the American Air Force base in Germany to get some coffee because I didn't like the European coffee. But I said, since he opened up his store and I got to smell it, and then I got to get in there and taste some real good coffee, I said, now I've become a real fan of good coffee. And you know, I was telling him all of my story, and then he told me his story of how he decided he said he was going to come over here, and he said he knew America was ready for coffee. He said they'd been drinking water all this time, and brown water, and he said he knew they were ready for some good stuff. And he was going to go to a college town. He didn't know whether to go to Berkeley or to Seattle, and he ended up in Berkeley. So anyway, we had a nice talk, and so ever since then, I've been drinking Peet's coffee, mostly. I mean, I have had other brands in case somebody has a picture of me at Starbucks, because I've been to Starbucks too. You know, when you travel around, like I do, there's not many Peets around. So rather than go to Denny's or you know, McDonald's, I used to go to Starbucks and get some strong coffee. I didn't buy any of their foo-foo drinks. I just bought coffee, and it's decaf. Incidentally, I drink decaf. But when I was drinking Peet's originally, I was drinking the strong stuff, And a matter of fact, I even had a blend made for me specifically. I called the bunkhouse blend. I forgot exactly. Remember what it was, Bob? Did I ever tell you? No. What is this, incidentally? Special blend? Yeah, okay. They used to have Sierra Deruta, which I used to drink a lot, but they don't have it anymore. But I had the special blend. I think it had Mexican, you know, like 3/4 Mexican or half Mexican and half some dark roast. I can't remember now. It's been a long time. But I had a special blend that he would blend it for me. And that's why when he was in the shop, if you needed something special, you just tell him and he'd do it because he was right there. And he loved that because he was really into coffee. And if he thought you were into coffee, he loved you even more. I remember the first time I bought some coffee in Peet's, I said, he said, what grind do you want? And I said, well, it's for a percolator. And he looked at me and he says, it was house blend I bought. And he says, poor house blend. You know, kind of made me feel a little bad because he thought I was ruining his coffee, but I didn't know any better. You know, that's the same with, I can tie that in with art. I didn't know much about art either until I found Van Gogh and I learned more about it, and once you learn about it, you become a connoisseur. And that's what I'm trying to get you to do with art. The more you learn about it, the better informed you are, the more you'll know what real art is, and the more you'll be anxious to see some stuff that's real art, and you'll be able to start judging whether it's good or not, and you won't have to listen to other people tell you whether it's good or bad. You'll know yourself. And that's the way it should be, because what art does is get to the inside of you, you know. You can't read about it in books and know what it's about. You have to look at it and go out there and understand it's work on your part too. You know, you make an artist, make somebody like me who works hard as an artist, you make me feel good when you put some time into the two. And then you're saying, I know a little more about art too, you know. And so then you look at my work and you'll say, I understand, and so on. Doesn't mean you have to like it. That's never been, I've never said that at all. People don't have to like what I do. But they have to understand what I do and why I'm doing it, and then maybe they can decide then whether they like it or not, and that's fine with me. I want people to understand it from coming from a level of understanding of art, not just, you know, people now are drinking brown water for art. I mean, that's where we are here in this country. Art is, it's brown water. I'm trying to get people to start drinking Peet's coffee. Get the point? Okay, Bob says I've run out of time. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to talk all day about coffee, but it just happened. Thanks for the coffee, Bob. Okay, we'll have to get back into the Book of Art next week, so come back next week. Go to my email, send me an email, go to my website, and see you next week. I'll be drinking tea again next week.